Chapter 46, Doomsday. I watched powerlessly as the sheepskin book fell down the mountain, filled with regret. The prophet's prediction was clear. The moment the sheepskin hit the ground, a sandstorm would arise to swallow Zaglama Mountain. My worst fears were coming to life. Resigned to fate, I climbed with hands and feet towards the summit. Suddenly, I heard the chilling cry of a woman close to my ear. The sound was almost imperceptible amidst the noise of falling rocks, but it did seem to pierce straight to the heart. The voice sounded like Yi Sin, and it felt like a force was pulling me downward, trying to drag me down the mountain. My body felt heavy, a sign I associated with the presence of ghosts. With the sun already half submerged below the horizon of the desert, I was in the mountain's shadow surrounded by dark rocks. It felt as if I had encountered the gates of hell. Struggling to ascend to the mountaintop, where the rocks underfoot were giving way, I could only cling desperately to the mountain with my hands. Even though I couldn't, and didn't want to, look back for fear of losing grip from the shock, I feared being dragged into the ghost cave below. I tried my best to ignore the crying. The sound, slowly growing more harrowing, caused my heart to sour, my body becoming heavier, almost enticing me to let go. Seeing me in a daze and not quite right, Fatty and Shirley Young at the top wanted to reach down and pull me up, but I was just out of reach. As the mountain's crevices widened, and the mountain looked ready to collapse, with no rope in hand, they had to lower their belts down to me. Their call snapped me back to reality like cold water being poured over me on a scorchingly hot day. The crying and the pulling sensation behind me vanished. Not daring to delay any longer, I grabbed onto Fatty's belt and climbed to the top. The set sun in the vast desert had turned hazy. A breeze laden with fine sand swept by, casting a sinister shadow over the land. Anlaman, the old man, had once told me that such a wind was a sign of an impending black sandstorm. The prophecy of Zaglama's doomsday pronounced by the sage was at last upon us. Fatty and I propped up Professor Chin. By now, the old man was unresponsive, like a puppet, moving only when pulled and never appearing tired. But if we stopped, he'd just sit down and couldn't be coaxed back onto his feet. We had no choice but to drag him as we hurried down the mountain. The side of the mountain facing the ancient city of Jingjue had collapsed entirely, sealing the ghost cave because the colossal half, now hollow, had fallen right over its entrance. We planned to cross the valley after descending and meet up with Anlaman's caravan of camels. But the sandstorm had already begun, and there was no escaping it on foot. Reaching the base, we heard the sounds of camels from the valley, and Anlaman, the old man, was in a complete panic, driving the camels away. Fatty cursed, "Old man, did you break your promise to Allah?" Anlaman was also surprised to see us at the mouth of the valley. "Praise the true God," he exclaimed. "It must be Allah's arrangement that we meet here." Without much time to talk, we placed Professor Chin on a camel and each found one for ourselves. Anlaman asked about the others, to which I replied, "Don't bring it up. They're gone. This isn't the time to discuss. How can we escape the sandstorm? Lead us away quickly." It was pitch black, and the wind was picking up. Almost like the eye of the storm was the ghost cave within the mountain. The whipping sands made my face ache, and Anlaman had not anticipated this sudden and fierce sandstorm, which had come without any prior sign. Apart from the ruins of Zaglama and Jingjue, in the vast desert, there wasn't any place to hide, but the safest place in a sandstorm was as far away from its center as possible, so we just needed to run in the right direction to stand a chance at escape. Anlaman blew a long whistle, lifted a lantern as a signal, and led the camel convoy driving westward. At first, we heard strange noises from behind, like ghosts howling and the sea roaring. Then, as a gusty wind filled with sand and dust enveloped everything in darkness and lowered visibility, even with our mouths covered with headscarves, sand and stone still found their way into our ears and noses. After running a considerable distance, the camels became unmanageable. Anlaman stopped the caravan. No one could hear anything over the roar of the wind and sand, but he gestured to form the frightened camels into a circle. It seemed he was indicating that if we continued, the camels would scatter, and once scattered, none of us would have a chance of survival. The only option was to build a wall to shield against the sand and hide within the circle of camels, hoping for Allah's divine intercession. I nodded in understanding, and we gathered on higher ground. I suggested Shirley Young wrap Professor Chin in blankets, and we took shelter from the sandstorm right there. Fatty and I were desperately shoveling sand, and old Anlaman, after securing the camels, came over to help. We constructed a makeshift wall around the camels to shield them from the sand, then covered their eyes with blankets to prevent them from panicking and running off, while we ourselves wrapped in blankets huddled together. Fortunately, we were away from the eye of the storm, where the winds at the edge were already fierce enough to possibly shred someone into pieces near its center. Anlaman's camels were experienced in such conditions and huddled together, no longer in a panic. Partially buried by the sand, they shook themselves and shifted upward to ensure they weren't completely covered. It wasn't until the next morning that the sandstorm slowly abated. We had worked through the night fortifying our sand walls and were utterly exhausted. Only when we saw that the sandstorm had passed did we dare to stand and look out. Surrounding us were undulating sand dunes, the yellow sand crafted into ripples by the wind, creating a uniform landscape all around. The ancient city of Jingjue, the dark Zaglama sacred mountain, the queen's sarcophagus, the corpse flower, and the tombs of the prophet and saints, along with countless unknown ancient secrets, as well as Hal Gua, Yi Sin, Chu Jan, and Sutipong, were all forever buried deep beneath the sand. Professor Chen poked his head out from under the blankets, looking up at the sky and foolishly smiling. Shirley Young went over to brush the sand off his head, while Anlaman kneeled and prayed, thanking Allah for his mercy. Fatty opened all our bags in search of water to no avail, eventually spreading his hands in a helpless gesture to me. The sun rose slowly in the sky, its heat poisonous as it brazenly robbed our bodies of moisture. Resigned, I shook my head. We had been so focused on surviving that we hadn't thought to secure water, and it was too late now. 7 days before, we had passed the point of safe return, and even thinking of going back was impossible. The passage to the Zidu River was completely buried, and with just a few of us, it was impossible to dig through. Without a drop of water, we wouldn't last a day in the desert, and resorting to drinking brackish water from sandpits or camel's blood wasn't a solution. The thought of dying of thirst in the desert was so bleak it almost seemed better to have died within the ghost cave.